Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. I really wanted to do a proper Shiny review for this specifically, but then they decided to drop 2 additional SSRs less than 24 hours before, or rather, less than 24 hours after Luca's release. So, considering the fact that these cards go away in a week, there really wasn't enough time for my schedule right now to be able to put together a whole PowerPoint for 3 SSRs and do it any sort of justice. So we're doing the simple version. We're taking a look, of course, at the new produced SSR for Luca, her first, as well as the My Songs Collections cards for Amana and Fuyuko. Starting things off, we have Luca. Luca is a visual and vocal idol, which I think is very thematically interesting when you consider that Luca's name contains the proper wording for a specific type of bird, to compare with Mono Sakuragi, who also has a bird in her name. Their hairstyles, to a degree, can be considered similar, even if one is fair and one is, dyed black with blonde highlights. And the fact that the original Mono SSR was a vocal visual unit compared to Luca's visual vocal. Mechanically, this Luca has a lot of things that are very familiar. Her appeals scale based on the number of units available in your team, so the more unique teams you have, the stronger her appeal gets. But also, interestingly enough, she has access to a new type of mechanic that, for now, we're going to call Interest Lock. We have a lot of different names for it, and so Interest Lock seems to be the most reasonable, or Interest Block, Interest Denial. The point is, the closest thing I can compare it to in another game is, if you're familiar with Pokemon, the ability Wonder Guard, which prevents attacks if they aren't super effective. In this case, Luca's appeals, which are all AoE by the way, apply a 1-turn buff to all the judges where, if an attack is placed on them that is not the same attribute as the judge in question, the appeal does 0 damage. So if I use the vocal appeal on a dance judge affected by Luca's buff, I do no damage. But if I hit dance on dance, it's totally fine. There are ways around it. Appeals that have interest ignore are able to avoid this, as well as excellent appeals, as they are counted as all 3 attributes at once. Luca also has access to a mulligan on her initial appeal, and her plus appeal actually has interest ignore on a visual or vocal appeal. So that's how she can bypass her own effect, which is a neat way to take it. She has a nice 20% memory gauge passive if she is in the center position. She has a vocal visual 75% up if it is turn 3 or later, and Luca has already appealed on the turn, and she has a vocal 85% if you have 4 or more different units on your team. Her passives are for the most part pretty okay, and they synergize fairly well with units like She's, for example, and just play really well with what this Luca wants to do. I'm not going to grade her just yet, because I think it's a little too early to call. She's a card that is absolutely calling out a lot of the things that we've been doing in Gradefest for a long time. AoE appeals on the wrong attribute of judges, interest up using cards like Daikichi Kogane with interest reverse in order to explode judges. This Luca feels like a logical progression to slow that down and try to force a more, unified game plan across other units so that it's not just AoE until you win. Now, the buff only lasts for 1 turn, which means that it's really only strong for the player right now, not really for the NPCs that'll use it. So, we'll have to see how this ability evolves with her limited SSRs if they choose to continue with it, because I think it is certainly really interesting that they're taking that kind of route with her. So, I think the card is cool, but I don't know how certain I am on her being a crazy strong card. She's certainly one of the strongest initial SSRs we've ever had, if not actually the strongest. So if you're curious about this card, I'd consider it, but also keep in mind that her banner does not have a spark on it. So there's a very likely chance that you may not get her after 90,000 jewels, and I really would not recommend diving that far for her specifically. Now, My Songs Collection. First off, we're going to take a look at Amana. So Amana is a rainbow unit. It's the first time in a while we've got to talk about one of these. So this means that she attacks with vocal, dance, and visual all at once. A 2.0 initially, or a 3.0 at 4 stars. All of her appeals apply a couple different effects. A mental 3% recovery, or 5% recovery, depending. And then a 1% mental regen for 2 turns on the initial appeal, or a mental 2% regen for 3 turns on the 4-star appeal. Both of them link into an immediate 10% mental recovery. The point of this is that Amana is meant to be a very flexible card for any Alstroemeria team in particular, while being able to supply the buffs that Alstroemeria want. They don't really care how much they're actually healing because of how many healing bonuses they're stacking on top of each other, but the number of heals are important for things like Amana's passive. For example, her 4-star passive, which is Vocal Dance Visual 80% up, requires 5 or more heals during the run. Her appeal, her initial one at least, grants you 3 by default, 4 if you link appeal. While her 4-star appeal grants you 4 heals and 5 if you link appeal, once you let the regen fully run out. So the idea is that she's meant to help speed up passives like these to be much more feasible in the early game rather than the mid to late game. Most of her other passives also require the full Alstroemeria lineup, and it has to also be fairly early into the run. So, this is a really interesting way to approach Amana, who historically has never really been the most important card in Alstroemeria. It's almost always been the Tenka show, and if not, then it's a Chiyuki that is usually the forefront to the strategy. This doesn't really change so much for Amana here, but everything that she does benefits Alstroemeria in a really cool way, and really only specifically benefits Alstroemeria, rather than being some generically strong card for every single team. I think this card is really cool. I would probably put her into the maybe A- to A range. I still don't think she's inherently very strong. If we take a look at her memory appeal really quickly, she has access to a Vocal Dance Visual 1.5 that follows up with a Vocal Dance Visual 2.0. If you build her in step, you can actually have a pretty decently high damage memory appeal with this. But I think that the value really comes from the appeals as an off-center unit. Maybe not necessarily as a vocal unit, but as whatever you really need her to be. That's what I think is the best about this card, is just how flexible it can truly be, which I think is real cool. So lastly, we then have Fuyuko. Fuyuko is a dance unit through and through, and interestingly enough has AoE dance, which is the first thing Fuyuko has had in a while. A 2.5 initially, or a 4.0 when fully upgraded, but also apply multiple instances of dance buffs. The first appeal applies a dance 10% up for 3 turns and 5 turns, and links into a 40% dance buff for 5 turns, and a 10% dance buff for 10 turns. The 4-star appeal is a dance 20% up for 3 turns and 5 turns, and links into the same 40% for 5 turns and 10% for 10 turns. Her passives are not really that crazy. Her 2-star passive requires 2 or more active dance buffs for 75% dance, as well as memory gauge 10% up. And her 4-star passive is a dance 130% up if you have 5 or more dance up buffs. Really, the best thing about this Fuyuko is that she's a great alternative to Asahi 5. If you missed out on the opportunity to get Howling Asahi at some point, this Fuyuko can fit in the dance position really well. Being a dance position unit that can provide herself some fairly consistent buffs, and when paired up with certain Stray Light supports, should be able to access her stronger passives relatively easily. If we take a look at her memory appeal, it is a dance 50% buff for 3 turns that follows up with a dance 4.0. This is not the strongest center option that they have. They've had better choices, so I wouldn't really say that she's a mandatory center, which is sometimes the case for My Songs collection, but not really for this one. Especially because buff memory appeals are not the greatest. Usually double damage is the way you want to go because you're already so buff that unless the buff read 500% or something, it wouldn't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. So I think this card is also very solid. I would put this card easily in the A+ to S- range, purely because of the AoE. She's fairly self-sufficient, and I think she's a great card to fill in the gaps for Dance Stray Light, especially if you're just getting started. So, that will do it for this video today. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Good luck to the polls if you decide to, and let's look forward to the next banners in about a week or so. I've been Cho, thanks for watching, have a wonderful rest of your day.